Good afternoon, everybody. So let's talk about Module 5. We're going to run through this pretty quick because I think you're pretty well versed and have been pretty well versed in this. So culture, respecting cultural influences while providing home-based services is about meeting the needs of the individual, which is person-centered care, rather than molding the person into the type of care we provide. Failure to take culture seriously means that we view our own values as more important than the person we're caring for, their values. And we fail to understand the value systems that are held by different backgrounds. So, for example, Miss Ta is from Liberia, and her culture is very different than ours, although she's been very Americanized. The objective of this module is to obtain an understanding about culture and its influence on caregivers, patients and families, relationships among home care aides, patients and families, clinical care, and decision making at the end of life. The United States has long been seen as a melting pot of people from many countries and cultures. This diversity will continue to increase. When we talk about tendencies of cultures to behave in one manner or another, it must be done only as a guide, not as a stereotype. So, for example, when we see Muslims, we think, well, they should just conform into our health care. That's not necessarily the case. Most of you know someone who's is a Muslim, and if you take a few minutes and think about those people, specifically the females, they do not want their bodies shown. So we have to, in medical practice, be very aware of that is their culture, and they're not being just difficult patients. So when we talk about tendencies of cultures to behave in one manner versus another, it must be done only as that guide. There are different beliefs and behaviors within any culture. We have to respect that every person is different and unique. When you pay attention to culture, you also get to know the individual better. So if you go and look at www.census.gov, which I have up for you, so you can actually see that in 2012, our population estimate, this is North Carolina in comparison to the United States, you can see that our census is about 9.7 million people, where the United States is 313.9 million people. You can also see that if you look at persons under the age of 5, in 2011 we had 6.5, which was national average, as well as persons under 18, we're at the national average. Persons 65 and older, we're right along the national average. But if you look in the state of North Carolina, we actually have a larger increased percentage population that are female. Then you can actually divide based on ethnicity. You can look at whites versus African Americans. Hold on, gotta go for a fire drill. Be back. So see, fire drills don't only happen when you guys are here, they happen when you're not. So let's get back to the census. So you can actually see lots of data. As you guys know, the census lags for many years. Sorry, you guys. So if you look at people living in the same house, we're basically on par. Foreign-born persons were actually lower. And if you think about that, even though the United States is a melting pot, Texas would probably be the higher ratio because of Mexico being on our border. Language spoken at home, English being the primary language, we are also lower as well. High school graduates were on par. Anyway, so take a minute, look around at the census.gov, and it's got some pretty interesting information. I'm willing to bet that the population here based on ethnicity will have had a change by 2012. So when we talk about tendencies of cultures to behave in one manner or another, it must be done only as a guide, not as that stereotype, okay? You have to pay attention to culture to get to know individuals. So if trends continue by 2050, 1 in 2 Americans will claim membership in another ethnic minority. So let's begin by defining some terms so we make sure that everybody understands these concepts. Sorry, guys. So culture can be defined as those socially transmitted values, customs, arts, behaviors, and beliefs that guide a person's worldview and decision making. Everyone comes from and is influenced by one or more cultures. Culture begins at birth, and it's incorrect to think of some groups of people as being influenced by culture more than other groups. In other words, middle-class Americans of European descent have a distinct culture just as Koreans or Mexicans do. Culture is universal. Who you are, what you believe, and how you act is formed by your culture. In any given society, there will be minorities. There's a dominant culture and a non-dominant culture. Culture doesn't only refer to ethnic origin. There are also cultures defined by religious belief and by lifestyle. So worldview includes issues such as what is the purpose of human life? How do humans fit into the universe? Are they there to dominate the earth or live as part of it? How is family defined? What are the expectations for how males and females interact? How should younger people interact with and treat older adults, including the very old? So for example, your definition of family may be a mom, a dad. Some people's definition of parents may be 2 moms or 2 dads. Another definition of family could be a blended family where you have a mom, a stepmom, a dad, and a stepdad. Those are all varying views on family. Not that anyone is wrong or anyone is right. It's how we're raised and what we think. So how do people define right conduct, right from wrong, moral and ethical thinking? How do people determine acceptable and unacceptable behavior in a given situation? So in your culture as teenagers, it's okay for you to curse and say the F word and the D word and the things that if I had said at home, my parents would have probably slapped my face. But your culture is a little bit different. You feel compelled to go against the grain, challenge authority, where my culture at 46 was you didn't do that. That was unacceptable behavior. So how do things happen in the world? Does God direct events or do they happen by chance? Do good things happen to good people? Do bad things happen to bad people? So those are all things that kind of formulate how we think and how we view the world. How does a person define beauty? How are the definitions of beauty reflected in art, music, and architecture? Race is defined as the inherited physical traits that characterize distinct groups of humans. This term focuses on ancestry and genetics. In reality, people are genetically more alike than different. Lately, there's a question as to whether race has any meaning. Perhaps race is more of a social idea. However, race remains an issue in many areas, including healthcare, employment, and social justice. Racism is defined as the belief that race is the key factor in determining human qualities and abilities, and that one race is superior to another, based on racial differences. This belief leads to unequal access to services, including healthcare. It also strains relationships among different people. For example, African American community versus the Caucasian white community, as well as the Hispanic community. This is a huge major racism issue going on in North Carolina currently. Ethnicity is described as the social, cultural, and political beliefs that bind a group together. Assimilation occurs when a person moves to a new culture and has to learn how things work and what behaviors are considered the norm. So, for example, if you lived in Durham, North Carolina, the norm is you're going to go to school. Most of you may work at an after-school job, but you will live with your parent or you will live with someone who takes care of you. Versus in Texas or a Midwestern community like Iowa, Idaho, you guys complain about getting up and going to school at 7 o'clock. Those kids get up and they have to work on the farm. So they may get up at 4 o'clock and milk a cow or get the eggs from the chicken. And then they have to go change, go to school, come home, and go back to work on the farm. So with assimilation, people adopt the behaviors and beliefs of the dominant culture. Children assimilate faster because they interact daily with the dominant culture in school settings. So you conform to what you see. Acculturation also occurs when a person or group moves to a new culture. However, people learn what the norms are in the dominant culture, but don't necessarily adopt the behaviors on a consistent basis. So sometimes acculturation means walking between two worlds. For example, Jose learns English but speaks Spanish at home or speaks Spanish to his speaking friends. That would be acculturation. You adopt to the community you're in, but you conform to the situation in other places such as home or friendships. So stereotype versus generalization. As we consider issues of culture, it's very easy to rely on stereotypes. So one of the stereotypes in my life was my grandparents grew up in the early 1900s. My grandmother was born in 1900. She would be 13 now? Good Lord. So when I was growing up, I can remember going to the grocery store. Well, there were two. There was the grocery store for the white people, and there was the grocery store for everybody else. And I do not remember as a child seeing a black person or an African American person at the places that I went to. So it was very strange for me to go to school and be in school with African Americans in the 1970s. So there are stereotypes that go along with that. And when I went to my uncle's funeral this past Tuesday, we went back to those small towns, so it was very different for me to see the differences. So a stereotype occurs when no attempt is made to learn whether the individual in question fits the statement we're thinking. We expect a person to act a certain way without allowing for individual differences. Stereotyping can lead to conflicts and misunderstandings. So you look at someone and you make an assumption. And you all know the first three letters of the word assume. That's what it makes out of you when you make an assumption. A generalization starts with an assumption about common trends or patterns of belief and behaviors in a group, but doesn't stop there. More information is sought to figure out whether the statement is appropriate to a particular person. Checking out generalizations can lead to getting to know the person as an individual with likes and dislikes. There are always Within any culture, there's a wide range of behaviors and beliefs. There's always going to be differences between individuals within the same group. Age, personality, and education all affect the way an individual will express their culture. Even members of the same family may have different cultural beliefs. Ethnocentrism is a person or group's tendency to think that their way of thinking, acting, and believing are the only right, proper, or natural ways. If we can't understand that there are many acceptable ways of thinking, acting, and believing, we'll have a very difficult time meeting needs of our patients. So if you guys remember when you first started this class, I asked you how many of you like to take a test and say, show what you know, A, B, C, or D, pick one. And none of you raised your hands. And then I said to you, the way that I look at the world is it's not about getting it right or wrong, as long as you don't kill anybody or you don't do harm to a person. It's all about the way that you think about getting to the answer. So what does all this have to do with home care or end-of-life care? Actually, it has a lot to do with it. Culture shapes the way people make meaning out of illness, suffering, and particularly dying. Can anyone think of an example that have come up for you concerning culture and caregiving, especially at the end of life? And I'm sure lots of you can think of something. Some cultures see death as a natural progression of life. With these beliefs, there may be less fear associated with death itself. Other cultures find death to be quite scary. Culture influences social customs around death, influencing rituals such as care of the body and mourning. Culture also affects how people talk about illness and death. In some cultures, it's okay to use the words sick, illness, death, and dying, and to talk openly about it. In other cultures, people use terms such as passing on or avoid talking about death altogether. These cultural differences in people and how people approach illness and death can bind people together or constrain the relationship, including relationships between care providers and patients' families. For example, my best friend died of breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer, on my 41st birthday. She died in my arms on my birthday. My family was constantly saying to me, it's part of the living process. Yes, you grieve, but you move on. Conversely, when a very, very close family member had a very similar situation, they went into this huge mourning process of weeks and weeks and couldn't go to work, couldn't function. And when I tried to say to them, you just said to me, dying's part of living, they couldn't see that with themselves. So culture also affects how people make medical decisions, such as who's going to be in the home to take care of them? Do they want to die in a hospital? Do they want to die at home? Those type of decisions. So some types of decisions are listed on the slide. For example, culture affects whether focus is placed on palliative or curative care, people having differing opinions and experiences about the acceptability of palliative care. Palliative care means that you've decided you do not want to try to cure your disease, but you want to live the life that you can for as long as you can. Curative therapy means that you want to take radiation and chemotherapy and try to be cured from an illness. Some groups are more likely to want aggressive treatment, which would be curative therapy. Some groups expect and even demand aggressive pain management, where others are more reluctant to use pain medicines. Pain can be seen as an expected and natural part of illness or even a natural part of dying, so there's less desire to take pain relief medicines. In some cultures, making decisions about care that one receives at the end of life is unusual, and advanced directives are unheard of. Advanced directives are do not resuscitate orders or a living will. The thought that one would try to influence the timing of life and death is unacceptable. Most people think, especially in this part of the world, that only God has the power of timing and planning when there's death. Sorry, first time I coughed, 20 slides. So cultural values. It's helpful to examine some basic values of our American healthcare system that guide how both individuals and healthcare providers make decisions. First, American healthcare emphasizes full disclosure about your condition and prognosis. As a healthcare provider, you are supposed to provide as much information as you can. In fact, you are legally and morally, ethically liable to do so. Another value we have in American healthcare system is a strong belief in individual autonomy. Autonomy comes from the Greek word auto, indicating self, and onomy, meaning rule, so self-rule. In other words, it's the belief that individuals have a right to direct their own lives and to make decisions that affect them. As one program participant said, it's the right to be your own boss. Our country was founded on individual freedoms, and this is a core idea that guides our health and legal systems. Another value, one that's related to autonomy, is the idea of personal control. Many Americans want to control what happens to them, and this belief is so strong that we have laws that require healthcare systems to ask individuals about advance directives. Advance directives allow people to direct the kind of care that you want, even if you're unable to speak for yourself. So if you have a coma or you've had a severe stroke and you cannot speak, if you have an advance directive, it tells your physician what he can and cannot do on your behalf. It's a decision you make early. So truth-telling, autonomy, and personal control are not the dominant values of many cultures. For example, other cultures are more interdependent and influenced by family. Family members are expected to make decisions about care, even if the individual is capable of making the decisions. So there are some cultures where the head male of the house would make a decision for a female. So if you were married in this culture, your husband would make the decision. If you were unmarried as a female, your father or your eldest brother would make decisions for you. Those of us who are female in this group, that's very difficult for us to think about someone else telling someone what they can do and cannot do to us. So as indicated earlier, many cultures value respectful communication rather than openness in communication. For example, in other cultures, people don't necessarily want to hear bad news. People may feel that forcing an individual to listen to bad news causes the person to lose hope or is unnecessarily distressing. Sometimes authors describe American healthcare providers as inflicting truth rather than offering the truth. Many cultures focus on trust rather than personal control. For example, people may choose to trust their God, their physician, a clergy person, or a family member rather than wanting to control the situation themselves. For example, on Tuesday, I saw my aunt, and my aunt is 80 years old. My aunt has breast cancer. Her doctor put her on medicine. She thinks that God will heal her if he wants to heal her. Yes, I grew up with these people. She also thinks that she cannot question the care that the physician is offering. He is God, quote unquote, to her, and therefore she, the underling, educationally has no right to question him. So one important approach to avoiding stereotyping is careful observation of each patient and the patient's family. We'll talk about key questions that home care aides will want to consider when observing culture. Language. What language is the person's primary language? What is the best language to communicate in? If you don't speak the language, what do? Get an interpreter. By law, we have to get an interpreter. Is it okay to talk about illness directly? Is it okay to talk to other people about the illness? Think about HIPAA. Decision making. Who's the formal decision maker? How about who's the informal decision maker? If the patient doesn't want to make the decision, who does? What religious or spiritual support is desired? Some people are atheists. They don't believe in God. What are the specific rituals that the family desires, if any, during home care? Can these be arranged? So some cultures, believe it or not, when the woman has a baby, they take the placenta, the afterbirth, and they bury it, and then they put a tree over it. The belief is that if they leave it at the hospital, some ill will happen to the newborn child. But taking the placenta and burying it blesses the family. Next time you see a tree in somebody's yard, makes you wonder. So, what gives the patient hope? Spiritual or religious beliefs, their family, do they have a pet or a hobby? Does the patient have a desire to control the situation? Or does the patient just want to give up personal control and allow someone else to handle it? These are all things that we have to consider. There are gender issues. For example, do women defer to men, like I said with some Muslim population? Or is it considered improper to be cared for by a person of the other gender? If the patient's elderly, how are the elderly viewed in your patient's culture? With respect? Or are they seen as a burden on society? Does the patient come from a group that has been oppressed? If so, how does that affect their interactions with us, the caregivers? Perhaps the patient has never questioned the medical establishment or feels powerless based on their minority status. Experiences of war, poverty, immigration, and political unrest all have profound effects on shaping an individual. Some of you may remember Ejlin Quanon. So Ejlin is also from Liberia. Ejlin fled Liberia at the age of 6. She remembers her life, but she has no pictures of herself before she was 7 years old. Does the patient belong to a cultural group that has its own sense of community and resources? Many times we as the caregivers know this cultural information because home care aides work so closely with their patients. Don't assume that nurses, supervisor, or other staff know what you know. You need to make sure when you care for somebody and you find something out that you share the information. If you're working with a patient who's nearing the end of his or her life, you may witness families beginning the grieving and mourning process. Humans of all cultures experience grief as a response before a pending death or after a death. Mourning is the process through which the grief is expressed. It represents culturally accepted expression of personal feelings that follow the death of a loved one. So culturally accepted expressions during mourning for one culture may include shaving the head, wearing black or white clothing, and grieving for a set amount of time. Another culture may express grief through drinking and dancing, with the surviving spouse expected to marry a person with a certain kinship position. Other cultures may expect the spouse or close family members of the deceased to mourn for the rest of their lives by performing certain rituals, wearing specific kinds of clothing, being addressed in certain ways by others, and the changing of one's rights and obligations to the community. It may be normal for a bereaved Balinese to laugh off a death because visual expressions of sorrow are forbidden among the Bali. In another culture, being possessed by the spirit of the dead may be considered normal. Other cultures may wail, light candles, cover mirrors, want to cleanse the body, or call a priest, monk, rabbi, or spiritual advisor. Different cultures have different rules for eye contact. In Asian and Hispanic cultures, avoiding eye contact demonstrates respect. In Middle Eastern culture, eye contact is avoided between men and women. Many Native American cultures believe that looking directly in someone's eyes could steal that person's soul, or the person could steal your soul. Avoiding eye contact would be important to this culture. So take care to correctly interpret the significance of eye contact. Some of you may go down to the Chinese restaurant, the Bamboo House down the street. Interestingly enough, the young man who works there, of about 23-ish, is an Asian gentleman. He will not look a female customer in the eye. So if you go to the Bamboo House, watch for that. There are also cultural patterns for touch. In Middle Eastern cultures, touching between members of the opposite sex is to be avoided. So, Shanice and Tyler, that touching thing, you guys would be ostracized. This is also true in the Orthodox Jewish religion. Asians may not like being touched, and physical contact is relatively infrequent in most Asian countries. Most Hispanics, however, will probably feel quite comfortable with hands-on care. They believe in the power of touch. Although home care represents the importance of touch, we must realize that this practice was developed in the context of certain nursing cultures, including the United States, and it might not be appropriate for all ethnic groups. So working with people from different cultures, coworkers, families, and patients is challenging. There's some general approaches to improve your care and your teamwork. Ask questions. Most people will appreciate knowing that you respect their beliefs, their values, and cultures enough to ask. Seek opportunities to become more knowledgeable on issues of culture. For instance, reading and in-services. Most institutions that you'll work for will have an in-service on their cultures. Investigate resources in your own community. When you work with someone who has a different background than yours, don't stereotype them. For example, don't assume a Filipino is Roman Catholic and believes in the Roman Catholic Church and adheres to the culture. Instead, ask the person. Find out about their beliefs. Develop an attitude of respect and tolerance. Everybody heard that. Develop an attitude of respect and tolerance. When you cultivate a general attitude of respect, it's easier to deal with differences in specific situations. Just because you learn to honor other people's beliefs doesn't mean you have to ignore your own values. Remember when we first started class, we watched the video, Everybody Has a Story. I don't know yours, you don't know mine, but you have to respect the differences between us. Finally, there's always a way to negotiate, working with others to ensure that everyone's values are acknowledged and respected. So in summary, there are many different types of culture. All cultures affect the way that we take care of our patients and make decisions. Within families, individuals can feel more protected because they're in a community of decision makers, or alternatively, they may experience a sense of being forced toward a decision they aren't able to make. Becoming culturally knowledgeable is an opportunity for growth as individuals as well as within our own profession. Addressing and respecting cultural differences will increase trust, leading to better and more satisfactory care for patients and their families. We are better prepared to serve them when we prepare ourselves to respect their hearts and their minds and truly go where our patients live.